Hello and welcome to episode number 4 of the Abundant Living Ecuador podcast. I'm Jesse Bayer here with Darnell Dunn. We're the co-founders and managing partners of Abundant Living Ecuador. We hope we have a great show for you today. If you haven't checked out last week's show, please go to our our podcast and do so. We had an interesting interview. We interviewed Greg Gideon, a local expat and business owner here in Loja, about life in Ecuador, doing business here in Ecuador, and I think there's a lot of valuable information in it. We hope to get into some topics of interest today. We hope to get into some things like language, learning the language, moving to a country where you don't speak the language, learning the language, integrating into the culture, some of the cultural stuff that you'll encounter here in Ecuador that we encountered, the real estate purchase and evaluation process, and a little bit on investing, market outlook, investing, some currency dynamics. So let's get started.
Where do we start?
It was interesting when we came. We didn't speak a word of Spanish when we came to Ecuador. We sat down in Quito, speaking no Spanish. Here we are, 2.5 almost years later, 2.33.
Has it been that long?
Yeah, 2.33.
Hard to believe.
Quick years later. Darnell, you're, very close to fluent at this point. I'm probably 25% behind you. But
the thing is, though, is that anybody that we've come in contact with would consider us fluent, I would say.
English speakers. Yes, English speakers are very impressed with our Spanish.
Yes.
Spanish speakers, not as much.
Not so much. But we get by.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of just interesting. I think a lot of people, I think it was a concern of mine, I think a lot of people have a fear perhaps of going somewhere where they don't speak the language. It definitely can create some uncomfortable situations when you're not sure what's being said around you, or, you're just, you're less aware than you would be if you understood what was being said. But, I
got
know
a personal anecdote about that.
Go ahead.
So I don't know if you remember this, when we first got to Quito, after the whole bank account fiasco, we had gone to lunch at this place in downtown Quito and gotten some lunch, and I wanted to get a couple of bottles of water. The altitude, as you know, is a little, gets to you a little bit, especially when you're first coming here. And I was first going to get 2 bottles of water, and then I decided I just wanted 1, and I thought the guy was trying to charge me for 2, and it ended up in, a shouting match over, 50 cents or so.
Yeah, which you see those kinds of things, maybe not to that, maybe not a shouting match, but you see those kinds of things where you see people who are English speakers or, another language outside of Spanish, native speakers, and they're in some interaction. The interaction is in Spanish. They don't understand what's being said, and as a result, they think they're getting screwed, or they get upset for, something they don't understand. So that's certainly, those kinds of things can arise when you don't speak the language. But it's interesting. I suffered through mandatory, I think I took French in high school. I sat next to a Senegalese, if I'm saying that right, a Senegalese friend of mine, who, they speak French in Senegal, and copied off of him, and squeaked by with my 65 to get out of the class. I'm terrible at learning languages. I don't like studying, so I have not studied Spanish 1 minute since I've been in Ecuador, and I speak Spanish, so it can be done. I am proof that you can learn a new language. I don't speak it fluently, but I do business in Spanish every day, without problems. So
yeah. And I had a little bit of a background. I took it in elementary school and high school and a little bit in college, but it was the same material over and over and over again. I didn't feel like I learned anything, and certainly thinking back on it, I don't feel like I really called on any of it coming down here. Just a lot of, I kept the books though, and studied and practiced, and I think, when you immerse yourself in it, when Spanish is all that anybody ever speaks to you, and over a long period of time, anybody's going to pick up on a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think I would just say for people, like, yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. Yes, you're going to have some funny situations while you're learning the language. Also enjoyable situations, working your way through interactions in a language you don't speak. But you definitely can learn the language. It's not, for you. I mean, you're 2+ years in. You're essentially fluent, and you put some time in. I don't know, how much time do you spend studying?
I haven't been studying much recently, but at some point I was studying for at least an hour a day.
Yeah. So 2 years, maybe an hour a day, maybe a little less, because I know there are other times you weren't studying as well.
Yeah, right.
You're pretty much fluent. So that's kind of, I think, a sense of time frame and those kinds of things. I don't know. Did you want to get into Montanita and a couple of those experiences we had traveling the country before we spoke Spanish? And by the way, I can attest to the fact that I didn't realize you had taken Spanish in high school and college. I can certainly attest to the fact that you retained none of it because you did not speak a word of Spanish when we were traveling around those first few weeks.
Not at all. Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, we had both taken those 2 weeks of Spanish school, one in Quito and another one in Montanita, because we thought, hey, it'd be great to see this beach town that everybody outside of Ecuador always talks about, and also, learn Spanish on the beach. So we figured, hey, this will be great, and there'll probably be other people like us, and it'll be a worthwhile experience. Right. That was not the case.
By like us, they were also human.
That was about the only thing we had in common. If you want to go to a Spanish school with kids who wear sandals all day, and it was basically hippies who were there to surf and
smoke lots of marijuana,
and live in. I mean, it was like living in a summer camp when you were 12 years old. Right. Great mixed drinks, though.
Great mixed drinks. If you want mixed drinks, go to Montanita.
So not exactly what we had planned to do, but it was a good experience. It was really important for us to, although we had already decided to settle on Loja from the very beginning, or the Loja area, to see the country, get to see what it was all about, to have a sense for where we're going to be living for this foreseeable future, to really get a feel for it. So Montanita was just one of the places that we had traveled to. We also spent some time in Quito, in Manta, in Santa Marianita, which is a beach just south of Manta. Really well known for windsurfing. Neither of us do it, so we didn't really enjoy it. Very windy.
Beautiful beach, very windy.
Yeah, I wouldn't go back, but if I were a windsurfer, I would definitely put it on my list of places to go. We also made it down to Guayaquil, Cuenca, here to Loja, and also Vilcabamba to see it in that initial trip. So definitely worthwhile. I'd recommend anybody who's planning on relocating here to see a little bit of the country, because there's a lot to see.
Yeah, off of the language stuff, there's some of the language and culture go hand in hand, and coming from the States as we did, those things are very different. When I think this, so we wrote a blog piece about this as well. You can go check out. But there's a funny kind of joke we have where we call it the Ecuadorian no. So basically back home, if you're asking somebody a question and they can't do it, most people are going to say hey, I can't do it. Or if you're trying to figure something out and the answer is no, generally people will say no when the answer is no. Now I have run into a few people back home who may say yes and it means no, or may just not follow through on things. That certainly does happen, but I don't know that, and chime in, I don't know that either of us have encountered yet an Ecuadorian who will tell you the words no when you're asking them, can they do something, or are they available, or a host of items such that you need a yes or no answer on.
I've never encountered that. A no here is you don't hear from the person again. Right. Or you call them when you guys were supposed to do something and they don't pick up the phone. And then you know
that means no. Right. So we joke about it, the Ecuadorian no. So it's like if somebody says, yeah, that's no.
No, I actually had this experience the other day. I was chatting with a business partner of ours, and I had referred him to somebody who has a development. He wanted to list it on his website. He runs MLS Ecuador. So I had put him in touch with someone. They had a meeting. They had agreed that there was going to be some business that was going to take place between the two of them. That they had some agreement. They were supposed to then confirm it or get together or something like that. Guy called him 35 times. Has yet to get in touch with him.
This is the American guy calling the Ecuadorian part of the Ecuadorian he was supposed to be doing business with. They had an agreement.
Yes. So I was thinking to myself, because he's been here for, I don't know, longer than either of us have. I would have thought he would have picked up on that by now. So he was like, yeah, I'm not sure. I wish he would just give me a yes or a no. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if he didn't pick up the phone, that means no.
Yeah, and I mean, those things are funny here, and they're different. And the advice that I would give anybody is, immerse yourself in the culture and roll with the punches. If you're coming to Ecuador thinking you're going to Arizona South, you're gonna be frustrated and disappointed with those kinds of things. If you're coming to Ecuador, you got to say, hey, I'm coming to a new culture and a new language, and I'm gonna go see what that's all about. Because there are all of those kinds of differences, and after a couple of months, you figure out how no gets said. It's just different than no gets said back home, and it's just as clear, really, once you've got it, once you figured it out. And that's just an example. I'd say there's other things like that.
Absolutely.
But so certainly you're going to be dealing with those cultural differences down here. Have fun with them.
Yeah.
Or get really mad, but
As someone who got really mad in the beginning, I can tell you that it's draining, and you can only get really mad about the same thing so many times.
Yeah. Also, interesting thing when you're learning the language and learning the culture, is the difference between doing business, even if you're not running a business, even if you're just like looking for a carpenter, looking for somebody to hire for something, versus social interactions. As you're learning the language, it's a lot easier to have specific conversations about specific things, for example, business, than it is to get all the innuendo and all of the hidden meanings and the meanings of jokes and
double meaning,
right? Of social interactions. So that definitely comes later. I would say, for you and your Spanish, you're right there on every social interaction. I probably, catch 70-75% of the jokes at this point. So that's kind of the last thing to come, I would say.
Yeah, it takes some time. Yeah, I'm still learning. It's a process, but it's fun. It's a fun process, I'd say.
Some of the other differences I've noticed in the culture down here is kind of group dynamics and personal dynamics.
Big one.
Maybe I would say actually definitely the thing that I enjoy the least about Ecuadorian culture is there's just nothing off limits on a personal basis. So extremely personal questions are normal. People expect an answer. Everyone answers, and that also includes people who aren't there. So you could.
They also answer these questions on your behalf when you're not there.
Right, which is back home. That's fighting material. Like, you're talking about me. Here you're talking about me is, of course I'm talking about you. Everyone. So there's a kind of level of sort of gossip or just discussion about anybody, which is probably the thing I enjoy the least about the culture here.
Do you have any good examples to share?
Putting me on the spot. I would say no. I don't know that one pops into mind. I would say that you could chat with anybody at any time about anyone, and that's. Everyone does that. So it's just. It looks like you're thinking of one.
Well, nothing specific, but people regularly ask me about you.
Right.
Or people will say, oh, geez, what's a good story? Or people, remember when Peter was saying that Nicole was my sister? So people were like, oh, yeah, you're related to this person. So people were just going off that information that they heard that was not true.
Right. Right. So there's always a lot of rumors that may or may not have anything to do with reality, but there's nothing, it's not shunned upon to talk about them.
Right. And I think that's an indication of it. So people just assumed that because he said it was true, and people just were like, oh, yeah, so your sister. So,
right.
They either asked or he told them, but either way, that's something that,
right.
Would be considered back home out of bounds.
Sure. I mean, another example of that, just to make it real for people, I sat down with one of our topographical engineers, and, he started on a line of questioning about Darnell's girlfriend, who, I don't even know if Darnell really had a girlfriend at that time, and I certainly don't think he knew that he really did. So, who's that girl? What's her name? That's his girlfriend? Oh, are they there? It's like, what? Why? How can you ask me this? I'm not him, and even if I was him, you're not allowed to ask these questions.
And the funniest part about that is it turns out, he was on a fact-finding mission because his wife is related to my ex-girlfriend somehow, some way. I forget. He told me, but he had, after Jesse told me about this conversation, the next time I ran into him, he started down that line of questioning and then said, well, yeah, my wife is this person and this person. Don't you know this person? I'm thinking to myself, what does this have to do with my topographical report?
That's also another interesting thing here. Like, very different in terms of the groups of people who know each other. I mean, we're in a city of 200 to 250,000 people, but you could among the group, or you could say class of people, everybody knows each other at least by like last name, or at least by some familial connection.
Yeah. One of their last names,
right. So, the business community, or the professional community, for example, in Loja, which is not small, we're talking a lot of people. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone in the business community who you could give them a name and they would not at least have a recognition of the name. Name, very important, who your parents are, those kinds of things, kind of...
How many cows your grandfather owns.
Those kind of things... sort of distinguishes the classes here really in a different way than certainly I was used to. The classes are kind of segregated in Ecuador too, more so I would say than in the States even, which is very segregated there. Yeah.
What's an example we could give to people to kind of drive this point home, you think?
I don't know, it's like there's very little mobility, I would say, like between the classes. It's like if you grew up on working the land, and your parents worked the land and their parents worked the land, there's very little chance you're going to be a lawyer or you're going to be a professional of any kind. There's very little chance. And vice versa. If your family goes back generations as landowners, as like the privileged classes, I would say, or whatever in Ecuador, you're not going anywhere else. You're going to be a lawyer or a business owner or whatever you're going to be. You're certainly not getting your hands dirty. You're not.
Or your parents will just support you for the rest of your life.
There's certainly some of that as well.
But you're not going to work.
Yeah. So, and families are very important to people. There's not as much mobility. Families all live in the same areas for the most part. So, not a whole lot of people, grow up in Loja or grow up in Quito and then go somewhere else. Obviously, that's increasing in frequency now because the roads are great and now there's air travel and but for the most part, families have lived where they've lived for many, many, many generations.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So when we first got to Ecuador, one of the things we were here to do was buy a large piece of land to do a really cool style of development on. We spent, a year plus, whatever it was, looking for land, and I think the process, that we went through is illustrative of, what it's like to buy land in Ecuador, the due diligence process, looking for land. So when we were going through that process, we were doing it separately. We were searching for land, and what that means here really is going into the towns, talking to people, talking to store owners, taxi drivers very often sort of act as the de facto real estate agents, and going on these land searches.
Yeah, and how many properties do you think we saw before we settled on the one that we ended up purchasing?
I mean, I don't know an exact number. I think I probably saw by myself, I don't know, 10 to 15 or something.
I'd say I also saw something around 10 by myself, and we saw some together as well too.
Yeah. So maybe 30 or at least. And that's when I say, we would have been aware of probably 150 or something, or maybe that's too high, or 80 or something. But maybe we actually went and set foot on, I don't know, 30 or
give or
something
take,
like that. Yeah,
give or take. And how did we stumble upon the property that we ended up buying?
Yeah, I mean, that was it was interesting. We weren't looking. We ended up buying a really large piece of land. It's really even in Loja. I say 5 minutes from Loja, but it's really almost in Loja. It's like 5 minutes from Hipito Park, which is a very large and nice park here in Loja. But we weren't really looking in Loja. We were looking more in a little warmer climate than Loja has mostly. But we just came across this incredible piece of land, actually through an agent. But an agent who can't show you pictures and can't demonstrate the land to you in any way outside of bringing you to see it.
He was able to show us the property essentially because he was friends with the owners. He just happened to be in real estate and speak English, so they figured, hey, well, he might be able to find us a buyer for this property. And after a pretty lengthy due diligence process, we ended up purchasing it. And that included a lot of steps that in my experience back home really is a little bit different. The main difference is no title insurance company, so you're really having to do a lot of due diligence on your own that you wouldn't have to, just to make sure that the person who's saying that they own the property actually does own the property, that it doesn't have any tax liens or any other lawsuits connected to the sale of the property that would cause the property to not be able to be sold prior to those lawsuits being rectified.
Or used as well.
Or
used in the way that you want.
Right. Yeah. So land use as well, too. And in Ecuador, that involves multiple ministries of the government to make sure that you can do what it is that you want to do on the property. We also, in this particular case, found that the property was very close to a forestal reserve, which the municipality doesn't allow you to build on at all. And so that was a whole process of finding out whether, in fact, the land was on it. It just turns out that it bordered there, and that took us a long time to find out. And once we were able to figure out how everything worked, then we entered into the negotiation with the family that, had its hiccups like any other real estate transaction anywhere in the world, but was relatively smooth in a lot of ways, I'd like to think.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just say for anybody who's looking at land in Ecuador, get your ducks in a row on the due diligence process. If you're purchasing through us, we do all of that because part of the reason we founded the company was to help people with those kinds of things that we figured out on our own, but are really quite difficult if you're not familiar with the process, language, don't have context in the government, etc. But yeah, if you're going to buy land here, you've got to do your due diligence, and you're on your own. So you're not going to be there's not going to be a title company who says, okay, clean bill of health, buy it. You've got to go to each government ministry and check it out and make sure, all of those things that Darnell mentioned are in order.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Make sure they're in order. Yeah, I think the other thing that people get themselves in trouble with is back home you're just so used to everything being so, what's the word I'm looking for? Organized? That's not the word, but I think that standardized is a better word. Everything's so standardized that it's like, oh, well, if this happens, some of these mistakes that you can get yourself caught up in would lead most people to feel like they got cheated, or it was somebody else's fault, or how could they not tell me this? And really, I think going back to the cultural difference, that's just a cultural difference here.
Yeah, and you hear a lot of people say gringos here, which is not really, people don't really use it as an insulting word, but you hear a lot of foreigners. With their stories, they're very upset about what happened in some particular real estate transaction. But if you talk to them, none of them checked any of these things out. They just took people's word for it and bought properties and then realized there was problems. Well, from my perspective, they screwed themselves. No, they didn't. Nobody hurt them, or there wasn't some process that damaged them. They didn't do their due diligence, and as a result, they ended up with something that wasn't as they thought it was, which I think is pretty normal anywhere. It's just that, as Darnell pointed out, back home that process would be standardized, and so when the title company tells you the title's clean, then the title's clean.
Right. And that also goes back to the Ecuadorian no as well too, where people will just say yes, 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 even when they mean no or they're not sure. And so people just in general don't want to say, no, I can't do this for you, or no, I don't know, or I'm not sure. And so it's really incumbent upon you to ask those questions and to use your best judgment in terms of determining whether somebody knows what they're talking about.
An interesting piece of that too is just to characterize, I think what we're saying is 100% true, but I just want to make sure that we're characterizing it the right way. I find Ecuadorians in mass to be very honest. I find Ecuadorians to be, in general, more honest, I would say, than the States. There's less BS. There's less game. There's less trying to trick you and fool you and get over on you. There's much less of that here. So when an Ecuadorian is sort of just kind of saying yes when it's no, they're not lying. They're just I don't even know what the word would be, but it's just a cultural trait. It's not a lie, which is just kind of an interesting piece of it. They're not saying yes when it's no. They're just kind of not saying no. And I don't know if I'm making that point very well, but it's not so much an honesty thing as it is just a way of communicating or something.
Or it's not, it's not malicious. It's not like the person isn't intending to put you in a bad situation. They're just not going to say, no, I don't know.
Yeah. Because, one of the things I enjoy most about Ecuadorian culture is the lack of pretense. It's just, there's very little pretense with people. Most people are not trying to be something they're not. They're not trying to show you some side of them that's, they saw in a music video. Or, there's much less pretense here than coming from the States. Some of the reasons that we were looking for land in Ecuador, and I think some of the reasons that other people are thinking about leaving places like the States and Europe and Canada, or investing, even if they're not leaving, investing in South America, even Central America, or parts of other parts of the world, are some of the economic trends, investment trends, those sort of things that are going on in the world. We were if you look around, and I know a lot of people are. I think a lot of our business is people who are aware of these kinds of things. You look around at what's going on in the States, what's going on in Europe, what's going on in the Middle East, the geopolitical stuff. We've got Russia and China lining up against the U.S. Over Syria and Iran and other places, and we've got just a pretty rapid change in the States in terms of your freedoms. It's kind of a bit of a police state in certain ways. The introduction of FATCA, has made it more difficult to move money around and to do business. Banks are making it harder to get money out of the country. A lot of people have concerns over Fukushima. California is in a huge drought. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, people are renouncing citizenship at record rates.
Every year that the record, there's a new record for that. Yeah, and that's those numbers really lag because you need to be where you're at quite a few years to be eligible. To be eligible to apply for citizenship in your new country in order to renounce citizenship in your old country. So if somebody's renouncing now, that means they've left at least 3 years ago.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're talking about a 3 to 5 year time window. Yeah, so yeah, those numbers do lag. So people are, more and more people are considering leaving the U.S. And I think you could probably apply that to Canada and Europe as well, or some countries in Europe, for the economic reasons and the geopolitical reasons that you just brought up. Which should we get into first?
I mean, I think some of the, I think the investment standpoint in terms of what Ecuador offers that is attractive if you're looking to sort of stay ahead of trends. Gerald Salente, for example, who's widely considered, the best trends forecaster in the world. He says, gold, guns, and arable land and water. Mm-hmm. What's the Jeremy Grantham, who's also considered, who's considered one of the best investors on the planet. He makes a strong case for arable land and water as well, and that's really what Ecuador offers.
Right. Yeah, and that's a trend that, in addition to those kinds of forecasters and investors, you also have, institutional players like sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, university endowments that are investing in arable land around the world in places like the United States, Australia, New Zealand. And they're paying a premium for the kinds of things that Ecuador has in spades that, in my opinion, people just don't know about. There's not that line of institutional investors, international investors, looking for the opportunities that Ecuador has to offer.
Yeah, and part of that is just because the international business infrastructure is just not really there. Like, there's just not a lot of people like me and you here making this place accessible.
Right.
So it's like if I'm an investor who's not going to go to that place and be there, and I want to get in, how do I get in here? It's difficult.
Right.
But, those trends are changing. I mean, we have been approached in the last couple of weeks by, Remax is, they're in Ecuador. They're not in our part of Ecuador, but they're in Ecuador. But we were approached, actually, this week by Coldwell Banker, who's looking to get into Ecuador on a large-scale basis, and speaking to their team, they see all the trends. So it's very clear that the corporate, the story is starting to be understood. I think the story is already understood in terms of why Ecuador is attractive, but the story is starting to be understood about Ecuador specifically, in terms of the corporate and international business community.
Right, and corporations are always going to lag in that way. So the fact that they're recognizing that Ecuador is an opportunity in the ways that we have just mentioned, it's I wouldn't say encouraging, but it's interesting timing.
It's inevitable.
Right.
It's inevitable.
That's a better way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, there's one of the other reasons that we wanted to not be in the States, not to continue to live in the States, and wanted to live in a place like Ecuador, and there's certainly other good options, was the currency situation. So obviously the dollar has been the world's reserve currency going back at the very least to Bretton Woods. As a result of Bretton Woods, the dollar backed international trade. The dollar was kept as a reserve currency as well for the majority of the world. Backed oil, the trade of oil. So as a result of that, the dollar has pretty much had, an inelastic demand. The Fed could print as much as they wanted, basically, and there would be purchasers for those dollars because it was written into the trade deals and into the agreements, and enforced, of course, by the United States military. And that those dynamics are changing. I would say basically that time is over. It's not over today, but it's over. There's no reversing the trends there. China, Russia, all the BRICS are in the process of, or have already made moves to trade outside of the dollar. Libya was attempting to trade outside of the dollar before we went to war with them. Saddam Hussein, I think, in fact, was doing something similar.
China, in fact, they just launched their international payment system.
Right.
So basically, an alternative to SWIFT. So countries will be able to bypass the dollar to trade with each other. So that's, certainly you also have offshore trading of the Chinese renminbi in London, now in Singapore, also in Hong Kong. They're allowing international investors to invest directly into the stock exchanges in China as well. So it's a matter of time before that happens. They're also under consideration from the IMF to be added into the special drawing rights basket as well. They had just had a review months ago and they got rejected. So it'll be another 5 years before they're considered. But, in the next 5 years, they'll certainly be added to that for sure. And that's not to say that, they couldn't be part of the world's reserve currency before then, or that they wouldn't make some kind of exception.
Exactly. And then, at the same time that the demand side of the picture is changing in that there's going to be and is a lot less of it. I mean, right now, just to illustrate that point, right now, and I don't have the facts and figures in front of me, but right now, the central banks of the world, namely our central bank, is buying nearly all new debt that we issue. So there's, right now, the buyer of U.S. debt is the U.S. central bank. So that's obviously not a sustainable situation. But so at the same time as the demand side changes, obviously the supply side has changed over the last several years in a dramatic way. The Fed has printed, going back to 06, 07, multiplied the money supply many times over. So I mean, if you look at a money supply chart going back to even 1800. You'll see very little change up until about 1972 or 1 or whenever Nixon closed the gold window. Then you see a decent increase through the 90s, and then just exponential explosion into the 2000s, up to present day. So you've got just many more dollars in the world in many forms. Forgetting, M4 and derivatives and all that, which is a whole nother topic, but many more dollars all around the world, and at the same time that the international players are making moves to stop buying dollars.
I mean, think about it this way. The United States has supposedly been in recovery since 2009. We're having the longest bull market in American history. Yet the Federal Reserve is afraid to raise rates 25 basis points. That's 0.25%. They're worried everything is going to get derailed if we raise interest rates from 0 to 0.25%. So my follow-up question to that would be, well then, how strong is the longest bull market in American history? Right. Not so strong.
Right. So obviously you can see from our perspective, we would not be saying buy on the U.S. stock market or the U.S. bond market, or almost any stock market around the world for that matter, because as the chickens come home to roost for these debt-based currencies, the dollar, the euro, and others, paper assets are not going to be something you want to be holding.
Right. So what would you, in that, given that backdrop, what would you recommend? What are you thinking about investing in? Let's chat a little bit about that.
Sure, and I would encourage anyone who wants. We wrote a blog post on this. It's featured on the website. It's what was it called?
Asset classes.
Asset classes. So if you want to read a little bit about, it's a little bit about our thoughts on investing and the asset classes you want to be in and stay away from, you can check out that blog post on the website. But to summarize that and to make my gold and silver would be my favorite investment class right now. Obviously, gold and silver are not subject to inflation. You can't print gold and silver.
There's a finite amount.
There's a finite amount, exactly. You can manipulate the price, and the price is heavily manipulated, and that's done in the paper markets. But you can't manipulate the intrinsic value of the metal. So, as that price manipulation eventually comes to, I don't know if equilibrium is the wrong word. The word's escaping me. But as the price manipulation goes away, which it inevitably has to in any market, and the true value, the true price discovery is actually allowed to take place, gold and silver are way, way, way undervalued right now in terms of being falsely manipulated down through the paper markets. So I would be looking at gold and silver. Obviously, it's a hedge against inflation. It's a hedge against the currency. It's a hedge against any paper asset. And I would include real estate, less so in Ecuador, but I would include real estate as a paper asset. I mean, what would your home be worth if there was no debt markets for people to borrow the money to purchase it from?
Right. And I would say, for those same reasons, real estate here, especially arable land, is very attractive, because you've got a situation where Ecuador is essentially a cash market. People have to put down upwards of 30% deposits on their land, as opposed to, when you contrast that in the United States, where, first-time home buyers are putting down 3%. So you just have a lot less leverage in the system. And because it's a cash market, prices really have a lot less to do with credit conditions in the economy. And so you just don't get the kinds of price swings that you do back home. In addition, you've got just a lot of land that you can grow food on, where you have, in a lot of cases, water sources that you can use. So there's things that you can do with the land to have it produce an income stream for you. And lastly, because of the topography of Ecuador, there's a limit to the amount of flat land that's available. And so if you got into a situation where, the dollar, the world is off the dollar as the world's reserve currency. If you're not in a situation where you need to sell, then your property should hold value in a way that it wouldn't in a country where the supply and demand for land is much more dependent on credit conditions.
I mean, you said to me last night, we were chatting, anyone who's interested in buying gold and silver should be interested in land in Ecuador. And I think, for the same reasons, really.
Right.
Productive land that you can grow food, live on, and have a water source would be my 1A investment choice over gold and silver. And I just want to make the point also, while you can definitely get a loan in Ecuador, as a foreigner you can't. But you can definitely get a loan in Ecuador, as Darnell said, with 30 or more % down. Many deals are just done in cash.
Right.
Completely. So there's certainly some amount of finance deals, and that number, unfortunately, I would say unfortunately, is increasing. But the majority of land sales at this point are still done in cash. And so, you've just got a much less leveraged asset.
Yeah. So, I mean, the arable land is almost like gold with yield, in a way, because you just have a lot of income producing or income saving things that you can do with the land. You can live on the land and not have to pay rent, or you can lease it to other people to grow whatever they want to grow on it as well too. So lots of options there. Also, another way as foreigners that people can finance real estate deals here is to use retirement accounts. Self-directed IRAs are also a way that you can fund a real estate transaction here. And there are some custodians in the United States that still do foreign real estate transactions. Many don't, but there are some that do. So leveraging assets that you already have tax-free to be able to buy a piece of property here is something that we can talk about as well too. And we'll be having a blog post that'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks that goes into details about all the do's and don'ts and what you can do, what you can't do, and the different custodians that you can do it with.
It's just, if you're somebody who understands this story, who understands the story of arable land, of water, of securing an international place to live and invest, gold and silver, the time for Ecuador is just now. And I'm not saying the time for Ecuador won't be in 6 months from now. I'm not saying run out and buy, but I'm saying that the trends in terms of the forces on the market for Ecuador and then other places, I would probably argue Colombia would be in that conversation as well. But the argument for Ecuador, the market forces for Ecuador just all line up right now. And to recap some of those very briefly, most of the South American markets are older markets from both a tourist and investment and expat standpoint. The reason being is that Ecuador had political and monetary instability recently. So as a result of that, it's a new market. So you don't have competition. Obviously in any virgin market, any new market, if you're getting in at that time, prices are low. You're not going to have the competition that you would have in Chile, for example, or in lots of other places. And what Ecuador offers is what the world is waking up to understand its value.
And there are also things that command a premium in some of these other places that you just mentioned. Places like Chile, like Colombia, like Uruguay, like Paraguay. These are the kind international investors are going in droves to those places and buying what they could get in Ecuador for cheaper.
Yeah. In
a lot of cases. Maybe not so much in countries like Colombia or Chile now, just because those currencies have fallen drastically against the dollar, whereas Ecuador, their official currency is the dollar, so you're not dealing with the currency fluctuations. And
right.
So you can potentially buy some very nice properties in those countries on the cheap now. But all things being equal,
Brazil as well.
Certainly, yeah, Brazil as well. The opportunity in Ecuador is not being exploited in the way it is in those other places.
And, not getting too far off topic, but that's a great point. I would say to anybody out there who's dollar rich right now, take advantage of the strength of the dollar and the relative weakness of Brazil, Chile. Well. Yeah, I wasn't as familiar with that story, but Brazil, Chile, and certainly Colombia. You can get into those markets right now, in dollars, transfer them, exchange them, and buy real estate that in dollars is just dirt cheap.
Absolutely. Argentina as well too.
So I would, anybody who's looking, this is a great time to do that as well. I don't expect. Could the dollar be strong for some period of time? Yeah, it could. Can it be strong long term? No, it cannot.
I mean, even things like the yuan. If somebody is looking to maintain some liquidity.
Yes, I also am a proponent, although less so than the first two asset classes we mentioned, but I'm also a proponent of holding yuan if you have to hold currency. Obviously there's some more risks involved with the yuan than there would be with gold or silver or real estate or, even some other currencies in the short term. But over the long term, the economic power is shifting towards China. China's currency will back trade in some form in the coming years. It's been held artificially low, for many years. So you're not going to get hurt over the long term in the yuan as it's priced in other crappy debt-based currencies.
Something else I wanted to bring up as well too. We've talked about everything that we like about these asset classes, what makes sense, what the long-term story is. It's going to be driving the prices of these assets over time. I thought it would make some sense to also touch upon the risks, at least as I see them. One of the things that I think is a risk for people to consider in investing anywhere in Latin America, Ecuador not excluded, is certainly the political risk. Latin America has a long history of socialist governments, and as a result, you have a lot of populist policies.
Quote, populist.
Yes. I forgot the quotes. Quote, populist. Yeah. So in other words, what they're saying is that, they're going to steal the money from you on your behalf.
Right. And spend it on their behalf. Anyways.
Populism.
Right. Yeah, right.
So that's always something to keep in mind here, for sure. And we always do our best to stay abreast of any political, what's the word I'm looking for? Risks. But that wasn't the word, but yeah, I guess it'll work for now. Developments. So yeah, right. Things that are on the horizons, different proposals and things like that. Also, another risk is also liquidity. We don't have the same, Ecuador is a country of 16 million people that is about the size of Colorado. There's just not that many. There's a limit to the amount of real estate transactions that happen here. If you buy a property that you love, there's not the same probability that you're going to be able to turn around and flip that over a short period of time. So really, in the same way that you would have to keep that in mind with things like gold and silver, I think you would also think about Ecuadorian real estate in that way as well, too.
More so, yeah.
More so.
Absolutely.
So yeah, liquidity, political risk. There was another one that I was thinking about. It'll come back to me, though.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree. Political risks are the absolute number one knock against South America in general, Ecuador specifically. So, yeah, exactly. I mean, just to your point, stay abreast of those developments, which we certainly do. That's a big part of, what we do here. But, and there's a bit of a flip side too. Darnell mentioned, you're buying a property, I would say right now in the part of Ecuador that we're in, an average time that a property could sit on the market, for example, a piece of land, could be 2 years easily right now. Well, what does that mean? It means it's a buyer's market. So the flip side of that is you have all the leverage right now as a buyer in Ecuador. Everybody right now is selling. Everybody wants to sell, and there's multiple reasons for that. We can get into it, maybe not on this show because we don't have a lot more time, but everybody's selling right now, and as a buyer with cash, you have an incredible amount of leverage, and because all the trends are in the right direction, I expect, and obviously this is a prediction, so take that for what it's worth, but I expect over the next, say, 2 years for some of those dynamics to change in terms of there being more buyers here than there are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, in the meantime, for people who are looking to pull the trigger on a real estate transaction, certainly now is a time to give it some consideration. At least, start that initial process of kicking the tires, maybe visit Ecuador, see if it's a place that you're interested in relocating to. I know in the last couple of months, we've had multiple individuals and couples from outside the country contact us and let us know that they're in the process of narrowing down their search between Ecuador and 1, 2, or 3 other countries in some cases. So yeah, I would encourage anybody who's in that boat as well too to make that decision as soon as possible, or do the things that you need to do to narrow those choices down so that you can really drill down in terms of what you're looking for, what you'd like to do, and so you can analyze your opportunity set.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to get your boots on the ground if you're thinking about moving somewhere. A lot of people, I think some people make the mistake of not understanding a place well enough before they're, looking to live or looking to buy. If you're, I mean, we've talked about this before, but I mean, we're within an hour of lots of different climates. Even several different cultures are within an hour and a half, let's say, of us. So, if you're thinking about a place like Ecuador or anywhere else, go there and check it out and spend some time and see the different areas, see the different climates that are available, cultures that are available. The other thing I would say to people is don't make the decision based on price. I feel like a lot of people are looking at Ecuador and other places, maybe Panama and other places, based solely on price. If you're going somewhere just because you think it's cheap, number one, you're going to be unhappy because it's going to have lots of things that you don't like that you didn't consider because you were just considering price. And number two, I lost my train of thought there for a second, but come to Ecuador because it's beautiful and because it has the things you want, or it doesn't, and then don't come. But don't come solely because you. Oh, right. The other thing I was going to say is that those dynamics will change. You'll go to a place because right now it's cheap, and then things will change, and in however many years, maybe it'll be expensive versus the United States. Who knows? But those dynamics are not permanent, obviously. So if you're making a decision, I'm going to go to this country because it's really cheap right now. Well, okay, that might be good for a period of time until it's not. So, those are not the reasons, from my perspective, to look at a place like Ecuador. Yes, it is really cheap right now. And yes, you can get great real estate deals, and that's a more permanent cheapness because you hold the asset that you purchased while it was cheap.
Right.
But in terms of cost of living, that can, as foreigners come, that'll go up. Right. As the dollar keeps getting printed, that'll go up. Etc. So I would just put that in people's ears.
Yeah, no, that's really important because I think a lot of people come here with, maybe a Goldilocks perspective of what it's going to be like living in a foreign country. And you've got lots of people who've never been outside the U.S. who are like, I'm going to go retire in Costa Rica or Panama or Ecuador, or, name the place in South America. And the culture shock can be pretty strong in a lot of cases. And that's not to say that you shouldn't do it because, I came here without ever having visited anywhere in South America, and I love living here. And I wouldn't really change the experience that I've had for anything. But it wasn't easy, not every step of the way. And so, I've certainly heard some horror stories of people who've, come and kind of thought that this place was something other than what it was, and, ended up not being happy with the experience and, losing a lot of time and money doing it.
Yeah, and I mean, two things briefly, and I think we'll pretty much wrap up. But one of the reasons we're launching a real estate tour, which we'll have ready shortly, is to allow people to get the experience of Ecuador firsthand, so that they can then decide if it's a place they want to be, and do so efficiently and with help, before they make those kinds of decisions. The other thing, which I just occurred to me, Darnell was telling a story earlier about a semi-dispute he had with a vendor in Quito, a store clerk in Quito. This place just mellows you out. I think of Darnell would never get into a verbal dispute here. 2+ years later, I find myself just much, and I'm a pretty intense person, but I find myself just much more relaxed and more mellow. It's just a very mellowing influence. It's very hard to be. I don't think it would be very easy to live in Ecuador and be kind of high stress, high. I don't know. There's another word, but stress will suffice for now. You're just. It's not a go. You'd be hard pressed to live here and not feel relaxed and mellow, which I just occurred to me thinking of Darnell arguing with that guy, 2-something years ago, right after we had got off the plane from the States.
Yeah. So should we leave it there? Anything else?
No, I think we're good.
Great. Well,
Actually, no. Actually, go ahead. Let's wrap it up. Sorry.
You sure?
Yeah.
All right. Well, good. Well, thanks again for tuning in. Next week, we're shooting for an interview. Maybe we should give them a preview. Do we have that confirmed yet?
No, to be confirmed. So hopefully an interview next week. If not, you're stuck with us again.
Well, I wouldn't say stuck with us. I think they, if they've tuned into the last 3 podcasts, they liked hearing what we have to say. Well, everybody, thanks again for tuning in. Have a great weekend, and we'll be back with you next week. Take care.